Hey everyone, welcome to Resilience Unravelled. This podcast is a result of my fascination with subjects like resilience, accountability, burnout, life fulfillment and other life and work-based performance issues, as well as many of the other obsessions I bump into in my life. I spend my time working with highly successful teams, people and organisations, and this podcast introduces their remarkable stories and expertise, as well as my own synthesis of the key issues, strategies, tips, tools and resources to thrive in life. If you find this podcast useful, why not go over to our site qedod.com. If you'd like some resources on how to manage and beat burnout, head to qedod.com/burnout2019 for some goodies. Stay tuned to the end to find out details of how to order a free ebook. Enjoy the podcast. So today I'm talking to Frank King, and we've had people on like Frank before, I should say, who've covered subjects similar to Frank's, but not in the way that Frank's going to do it. So I'm really looking forward to a very, very fascinating conversation. Things which are important, but obviously we can discuss in a way that is respectful to people who've experienced these things, but also people who really need to understand that there are other people in the world out there who are going to be part of our subject area. So Frank, hi there.
Good morning, Russell Thackeray.
And good afternoon or evening, Frank King, because I'm sitting in the environs of Wembley Stadium, just around the corner from England football team's greatest triumph. And you're in where?
I'm in Portland, Oregon. I live in Eugene, but I'm in Portland. I just got back from Minneapolis. I was there for a sort of a speaker marketing boot camp. And this evening I've got a meeting of the NSA. I don't know, it's National Speakers Association. Oregon chapter. There's a chapter pretty much in every state. And then I head back home tonight to Eugene, Oregon.
We were just comparing our hotel rooms earlier. So we were sort of extolling the benefits of what this wonderful life we have on the road, speaking, consulting.
It's so romantic.
It all is, and the fantastic meals and the glamour.
The glitz and the glamour. Yeah, you know, I tell people, Russell, that I'm not really a speaker or a comedian. I am a professional traveler who just happens to talk.
Yeah. You get paid for traveling, really, don't you?
Yeah, I tell the cruise audience, look, you're not paying me for these jokes. You paid me to get here.
Yeah, that's right. You paid me to get on this ship and eat this food.
Yep.
So Frank, tell me why you're here, because I mean I've seen all your stuff, but I mean tell me about yourself and your journey and how you describe what you do.
Well, I started comedy in 1984 on April Fool's Day at the Comedy Store in La Jolla, a suburb of San Diego. Did 5 minutes of what they call here open mic night. And about halfway through the 5 minutes, I thought to myself, I'm home. I'm going to do this for a living. I have no idea how, but I'm going to do it for a living. And that was April 84, December 85, the day after Christmas. My girlfriend, then my wife now, and I went on the road. We gave up our home, put everything into storage we couldn't fit into our tiny little Dodge Colt, and hit the road for 2,629 nights in a row, nonstop.
What were you doing before that?
I sold insurance for straight out of college. I was married before to my high school sweetheart.
Oh.
Being a comedian, I was functionally unemployable, so I went to work with her father's insurance company.
Yeah.
I hated insurance, although it's a great business. My first wife was a lovely woman, but we had nothing in common. But you know what they say, opposites attract. She was pregnant, I wasn't.
Yeah.
And it came to a point where I thought, you know, if I stay in the insurance business and married to this lovely woman, I'm going to kill myself. And then my next revelation was very powerful. Well, I could quit my job, divorce her, try comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't, shoot, I can still kill myself.
Yeah, you've also got that.
That's how I got started in comedy. Then I met my current wife. Several years later, we went on the road for that 7-year odyssey. And then comedy clubs began to close. I got an offer to do radio. So I did a morning show, a rock and roll morning show in my old hometown, triumphantly returned.
Yay.
And it was the #1 rock and roll morning show when I started. 18 months later, I had driven it all the way to #6.
Right.
So one of my proudest accomplishments.
Yes.
I was always very.
I like the way you take all the credit for that achievement.
I do, and they give me credit for it because the other guy got to stay. the comedy club circuit had faded, and I'd always had a very clean act. And so the place for clean comedy to make any money really is in they call it the rubber chicken circuit over here. After dinner, after lunch, being funny at a banquet.
Yeah.
Did that till the recession. Lost everything in the recession when my bookings dropped off 80% overnight. Came close enough to dying by suicide that I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. Spoiler alert for the listeners, didn't pull the trigger. And I tell that story every keynote I give. And then a friend of mine that I was just talking to before I spoke to you came up to me at the keynote and said, "How come you didn't pull the trigger?" And I said, "How come you sound so disappointed?"
Yeah, right.
And so at that point, meeting planner said to me, "Frank, look, comedy's good. Clean comedy's great, but we can't pay you that kind of money for just jokes. We need some content, some takeaways. You need to teach our audience something."
Yeah.
I had always wanted to do that, Russell, but I never found anything I thought would make any difference to anybody in the way of teaching them something.
Mm.
And I got a book from Judy Carter. She famously wrote the Comedy Bible. That was her first book about being a stand-up comic and how you do it. And then she wrote a book called The Message of You, Turning Your Life into a Money-Making Speaking Career.
Right.
About halfway through that book, I thought, you know what? I do have something to teach, to say, because depression and suicide run in my family. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I'll spare you the details, but it's in my first TED Talk. And I myself, as I mentioned, have come close enough to dying that I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. So now what I do is I travel the country on the public speaking circuit. The official name of it is Suicide Prevention as a Workplace Health and Safety Issue. But the book that I decided at this past weekend, a friend of mine who was doing the boot camp said, "Frank, I'll tell you what the name of your book should be. It should be called Starting the Conversation on Suicide." Because, Russell, that's why people hire me. They want somebody to come in and start that conversation because it's such a difficult conversation to have.
And it's one we need to have.
Oh, Lord, over here, 47,000 people die by suicide in the U.S. every year. That's 1 every 11 minutes, which means by the time you and I get done, 3 more people in the U.S. will have died of suicide. Mm. So that's what I do now. I speak, and I focus on certain industries that have a higher rate. I focus on veterinarians, dentists, and they're like number 5, 6, or 7 on the list of top 10 occupations. And then construction, which right. is the number 1 occupation at risk for depression, thoughts of suicide in the U.S. So they are the only 3 of the top 10 or 12 that are actually proactive in working to prevent it. The rest of them know the problem exists. They just haven't gotten to the point yet where they're trying to do something about it.
Right. That's interesting. What about the? It's not a surprise to me to see the dentists, because actually they're I think it's the number one profession for stress effect.
Well, and that's what kills dentists and veterinarians. It's not necessarily suicide, but it's stress exacerbated physical and mental illness, whether it's a heart attack, stroke, or depression, thoughts of suicide. So stress is the linchpin.
What about all the sort of performing arts people, the singers and because
female creatives like that have a higher rate than male, although we lost two comedians last month, 2 guys I knew, both died by suicide. I have a podcast with a young woman, Pakistani Muslim comedian,
yeah.
And we call it the Suicide Prevention Punchline as opposed to Lifeline.
Yeah.
And we started it because of the high number of comics and other creatives who die by suicide. So we interview comedians and other creative people as well as clinicians on the podcast.
Interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? So tell me about your thing, because it's there's a real difference in the way that suicide actually takes place for men and for women.
Yes, actually, in the U.S., 3 times as many women attempt.
Yes.
Than men, but men tend to complete because of the easy availability of guns.
Yeah. And it tends to be more of a thought, doesn't it, with men? It tends to be, hey, I'm going to commit suicide, then they go and do it. Where there seems to be more premeditation with female suicide. Is that an urban myth, or are there any facts to back that up?
No, that is true. Women tend to use medication, or they a razor blade, they cut themselves, or they crawl into a car and run a hose into the exhaust pipe. Whereas men when I was gonna die by suicide, when I had the gun in my mouth, it was a 38 caliber revolver, and it was loaded with what they call federal hydroshock hollow points. So if you pull the trigger on that with it in your mouth, there's no coming back.
Yeah.
Women.
So what stopped you pulling the trigger then?
Well, it's when people are suicidal, one of the three major elements of that thought process is a burdensomeness. You feel like the world would be better off without you.
Yeah.
People say suicide's selfish. No, not really in the mind of the person who is going to do it. They think it's unselfish because they think everybody would be better off. Yeah. So I had $1 million life insurance policy, and we had just lost everything. My wife and I, we worked for 25 years. I had $1 million life insurance policy. So she would be brokenhearted, but she would not be broke if I pulled the trigger. But the catch is, in the policy, there was a 2-year suicide clause. If you killed yourself within 2 years, it paid nothing. If you waited 2 years and a day, it paid the $1 million. Yeah. So I called my insurance agent, and we're chit-chatting away, and I sort of casually asked how long I'd had the policy, and he said, I'll check, and I can hear him on the computer checking. And he comes back, and he realized what I was asking. I really wasn't asking how long I had the policy. Yeah. I was asking for permission to kill myself.
Yeah.
So he said, you've had it 22 months, and don't do it.
Really?
Yes. And he said later, after when we talked months later, when my first TED Talk came out on YouTube, I called him back to let him know it was up. And he said, yeah, Frank, I realized you were planning on suicide. He goes, I had no idea what to say. He said, so I prayed very quickly for the Lord to give me, something to say. Yeah. And I hoped it was right. And I said, well, it was. And I often tell my audiences, it's not always what you say. It's just, for goodness sake, say something.
Yeah, it's the timing almost, isn't it?
Yes, because 8 out of 10 people, it turns out, are ambivalent. They want somebody to go, don't do it.
Yeah.
2 out of 10, you're not going to stop them. They're going to do it. But 8 out of 10, and that's why people hire me to start the conversation. That's the good news. You can make a difference. You can save a life. And you can do it oftentimes, 8 out of 10 times, by just opening a conversation.
So you said the first thing was being a burden. What were the other two things?
The other two is social isolation. Oftentimes people isolate, withdraw from social activities they used to find great pleasure in. And the third one, is burdensomeness, social isolation. Oh, and the willingness to cross that barrier. We are born with an amazing drive to survive and stay alive, even as infants. But once you've made up your mind, you can cross that barrier, regardless of what the pain or whatever that is involved, ending your life, then that's the third leg of the stool. So if you feel like you're a burden and you've isolated socially, you don't have the social connections, and you've already decided you can do it. And I have an odd, somewhat rare condition called chronic suicidality.
Right.
Which means that for me and people like me, and there are quite a few people out there, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And I say in most of my TED Talks that means that a couple of years ago, my car broke down. I had 3 choices popped into my head unbidden. 1 was get the car fixed. 2 was buy a new car. 3 was I could just kill myself.
Yeah.
That's chronic suicidality. And most often after I speak, somebody comes up, sometimes more than one somebody, and they have those thoughts. They thought they were just some kind of freak. They didn't know it actually had a name, or that anybody, they thought they were alone. And the relief is palpable when they realize that there are other people with the same thought process. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, Russell, I realized at some point, I am like George Bailey in that movie, It's a Wonderful Life.
Right.
The angel shows George Bailey what other people's lives would be like if he had not been there.
Yeah.
And I've been shown what other people's lives would be like if perhaps they had not heard me speak.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe I've taken them just far enough off the path of suicide, they'll live a normal lifespan. And my second thought was, so I can't kill myself now because I would take all those people with me.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. So you've actually created the opposite of social isolation, because you've tapped into a virtual group of people.
Yes, the people that I have yet to meet. I mean, if I kill myself this afternoon, I'm speaking again on the 17th of September in Denver and the 1st of October at a school in Flint, Michigan. And it's conceivable that if those folks did not hear me speak and there were people in the audience who were suffering with one mental illness or another and felt terribly alone and had no hope, then they might in their lives, having never heard me speak, and perhaps I can instill in them just that spark of hope to keep them alive.
So you're sitting there, and I know a number of people who have committed suicide and a couple of people that haven't. And the question I always ask them is, so what stopped you, well, in this case, pulling the trigger or, jumping off the chair or off the bridge? So what and they always sort of talk about something going across their mind. So what happened to you?
Well, I didn't pull the trigger because I refused to leave my wife, not only brokenhearted, but broke. I had 2 months left.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah. And ironically, I have a psychiatrist friend who has had several people who have my condition tell him this. If it were not for my chronic suicidality, if I were not willing to do it, if things got really bad, I probably would have killed myself a long time ago.
Yeah.
So the fact that I had crossed that barrier, that I knew I could kill myself at 2 months and a day when the policy was in force, that allowed me to live that 2 months, to get through that 2 months. And by the time we got 2 months in a day and the policy was in force and my wife would have gotten $1 million,
yeah,
the bankruptcy gone through, the phone calls had stopped, I had kind of broken the surface of the depression, took a deep breath. So, but I've had people tell me, I've got a doctor friend who she was applying to a job in a hospital. And in the application, they asked you, have you ever had any of these mental illnesses, yes or no? And if you have you ever taken these medications? And it appeared that would be career limiting, that they probably would not hire her if she checked yes and the medication. So she checked no and stopped her medication and found herself a couple months later standing on a bridge about to jump.
Right.
And heard her mother say, "You got to call your mama."
Right.
So she got down off the railing and called her mother, and that's why she's alive. I've had people say, there's a young woman I know who's a dentist, and she is standing on a stool in the garage with a noose around her neck. And she happened to have her cell phone on her, and a former patient called who needed something. And so she took the noose out from around her neck, got down off the stool, and went to help the patient. So,
yeah,
it's for everybody, it's a little different story. And unfortunately, oftentimes people do not interrupt.
And it's almost like you get yourself into a train of thought, and it almost needs something to distract you out of it.
Yes, it's because 8 out of 10 people are ambivalent. There's a famous fellow named Kevin Hines who survived the jump off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Right. God.
And he said he was living in San Francisco, did not know how to kill himself. So of course he Googled it and it said, "How do you kill yourself in the Bay Area?" And it said, "You go to one of the bridges." And so he got on a bus and took off for one of the bridges. And he said to himself, if anybody asks me how I'm doing, I will spill my guts. I will tell them to call the police. I am suicidal. I need to be hospitalized.
Yeah.
And nobody spoke to him on the bus.
Yeah.
Nobody spoke to him on the bridge until he was just about to crawl up on the rail, and a woman touched him on the shoulder, and he thought, "Oh, thank God." And when he turned around, it was a tourist, and she said, "Would you take our picture?"
Oh, my.
So he took the picture. She thanked him. He waited until they walked away. He crawled up on the rail, and he jumped.
Right.
He wanted someone to come along and say, simply, "Are you okay?" So it's kind of that, see something, say something, just because, as I tell my friends who ask, "What do I say?" Just say something, anything.
Yes.
Just
And
don't be
in a
silent.
way, I mean, we talk a lot about resilience here, and the antidote, well, the opposite of resilience is committing suicide. But what you're actually telling me is that any suicide, any person, 8 out of 10 suicides could be preventable by someone caring enough just to say something.
Yes.
And because there's no real sign to spot it. It's not like when I was much, much younger, we had one of our colleagues disappear, and they found him having committed suicide in a car park. And
Yeah.
and nobody knew. He was perfectly happy. He had a happy life, and he just sat in his car and for some reason committed suicide. But as you say, that train of thought must have been somewhere in his head. But no one. I mean, it's very hard to say, do you have suicidal thoughts, unless you suspect that to be the case.
Well, and that's what I teach. I teach the signs, symptoms, and solutions. Signs and symptoms of thoughts of depression, thoughts of suicide, because there are signs, both verbal and behavioral.
So what should we look out for?
Well, and by the way, 90% of people who are considering suicide or attempt give clues in the 1 week, in the 7 days leading up to the attempt.
Right. Okay.
So for depression, there's a laundry list, but I'll give you, some of the more common ones. It's letting your personal hygiene go.
Right.
Can't eat too much, can't sleep too much. Has trouble getting started in the morning, but seems to rally in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. Then there's a social isolation. If they isolate themselves, they move or move out.
Yes.
Or distance themselves from their friends. What I teach next is what to say and what not to say. More importantly, what not to say. Don't say pull yourself up by your bootstraps, turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil?
Yeah.
What you do say to somebody you believe is depressed is, I'm here for you and mean it. I know that depression is not, you're not crazy, lazy, or self-absorbed.
No.
It's a mental illness. The good news is with time and treatment, things will get better. I will take the time, and you got to mean it, and I'll help you get the treatment, and you got to mean it. And then you have to ask this question. This is a tough one. This one, Russell, I practice myself in the mirror before I ever ask anybody. I say to them, are you having thoughts of suicide? You have to ask.
Right.
Now, there's an old wives' tale that you should never mention the S word, suicide, in front of somebody who's depressed. And I love the reasoning as a comedian. I love the reasoning. It might give them the idea. Suicide, what a great idea. Why didn't I think of that?
I've thought that one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's crossed my mind.
Yeah.
So, but let's say they don't admit they're suicidal or having thoughts of suicide. How do you know? What are you looking for? Well, if they are, again, eat too much, can't eat, sleep too much, can't sleep, of course, using drugs or alcohol to excess, not just to party, but to self-medicate. Yeah. They're gathering the means to die by suicide, whether it's buying a gun and ammunition or stockpiling medication. If they begin giving away prized possessions, because they want to make sure those possessions go to the people they want them to go to when the time comes. And here's one that is terribly dangerous. If they are depressed for seems like ever, and then out of nowhere, for no apparent reason, they are happy. Yes. Happy.
Yes, that's right.
Maybe that they have chosen time, place, and method.
Yeah.
And they know the pain is finite. And that, by the way, is the key, I believe. My friends call me when somebody Facebook, message me, text me, when somebody high profile dies by suicide, like Anthony Bourdain or Kate Spade.
Yeah, that's right.
And the question I always have is, why would somebody with that much to live for want to die? And my answer is generally, they didn't want to die. I didn't want to die. I'm in there. I didn't want to die. I'll be out in about 15 minutes. That's all right. Yeah, welcome to the hotel, Russell.
We've got to leave that in. I mean, that shows the exotic glitz and glamour of our lives, isn't it?
Bam.
Get out of that room.
I'm sure 11 o'clock checkout time. I don't think they'll send the cops.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then I tell them that I didn't want to die. I just wanted to end the pain. Here's the metaphor I use. There's a Greek character named Sisyphus.
Yeah.
And his sentence by the gods was to push a rock up a hill every day. And then when he got it near the top, it rolled back down to the bottom.
Yeah, that's right.
And having a mental illness, and I think a lot of neurotypical people don't understand this. Having a mental illness is like being Sisyphus. Every morning when you wake up, there's a rock in the hill. Some days the rock is small, the hill is not so steep. Some days the rock is a boulder and the hill is Kilimanjaro. But if you have a mental illness, every day there's a rock and a hill, and your job is to move it up that hill. And Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain, and I believe, all woke up one morning and we simply could not move the rock. We were just tired of living. And you mentioned resilience. There's a big push over here, teaching resilience, which I have mixed feelings about. I mean, I'm glad they are trying to do something. But I got to tell you, Russell, the people that I know who are the most resilient people I know are people who are mentally ill, especially those struggling with thoughts of suicide. So, if you're neuronormal or neurotypical, perhaps teaching resilience in case there was a situational depression and thoughts of suicide. But day in, day out, my mentally ill friends are the most resilient. Otherwise, they wouldn't get out of bed.
Yeah.
And paste on a smile and walk through the world like nothing is wrong. They're some of the most courageous and resilient and strong people I know.
You see, I would argue that that's not resilience. I think that's something else. But go on, carry on. So I'm interrupting you. Carry on.
No, that's okay. And like I said, I have mixed feelings about that.
Yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, we've plumbed the depths of comedy gold here, and so far. But can we get onto the serious side of it now? Which is because in this country there's a big debate running at the moment, and I'm part of this debate in a way because my mother died of one of those terrible wasting. I think you call it ALS over there. We call it MSA or motor neuron disease, where you get trapped inside of your body. You're unable to breathe and to swallow, to eat, and all that sort of stuff. And so we have this thing running at the moment about the moral and the physical argument about assisted suicide or assisted death, as it's being nicely called. And there you have people who do think they're a burden, do think obviously are literally socially isolated because they can't communicate, and they have the willingness not to survive, but they're not allowed to commit suicide, nor is anybody else allowed to help them either. So I wonder where you stand on that.
Well, one of the reasons we live in Oregon is we have what they call right to die or death with dignity.
Really?
Yes, there are several states in the U.S. There are people who move to Oregon simply for that reason, because they are allowed, with the aid of a physician and a psychiatrist. I mean, you have to be examined closely and carefully, both medically and mentally, physically, mentally. And then we have a friend whose husband had cancer and kicked it, and then it came back and kicked it, and finally, it was lung cancer, I think. And finally, there was nothing else they could do. And so he was allowed to pick his time, place, and method. He was allowed to go to the pharmacy and pick up the cocktail. And then, surrounded by friends and family, they picked a day, and he took the pills, and he swallowed the pills himself, and ended his life with dignity. He did not want to, he was ready to go. So there are states, Oregon, I believe, Washington, and maybe several others where there's a huge debate over here about that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we talk about the right of life, but we very rarely talk about the right of death. And it's and I think it's actually wrapped into the treating suicide as if it's how can I describe it? We treat people's suicidal thoughts as if they have to be treated with kid gloves, and therefore we're frightened to deal with people who perhaps want to actually die and see it as some sort of moral or religious problem, or a psychological problem. Whereas actually, taking your own life is it might not be sensible, but it is all right, isn't it? It was your right to blow your head off if you wanted to.
Yeah, there is a debate in mental health circles, and I'm thinking about doing a TED talk on it called "Whose Life Is It Anyway?"
Yeah, exactly.
And what I find is people who've had a relative who has slowly died of a wasting disease like ALS or cancer, they have a much more open mind. Correct. Since they've seen it in someone they care deeply about, and I would. If I were terminal, I would pick my time. I would be delighted. I would be glad I was living in Oregon where I could choose my time.
Yeah.
But then again, whose life is it anyway? It's could be somebody who is not necessarily at the end of life, but they've just they've had enough.
I'll have the test for my my mother's condition. If I've got it, I'll have 15 years left, and it's that thing. Well, I wouldn't have the bravery that she had, so I'll pick my time.
Yes, and
the wife was telling me stop talking like that. but I think we have the right to choose sometimes.
Well,
And talking about places of living hell and death, tell me about Holland and America cruise ships.
yeah, we'll get to that in a second. Speaking of the old
Cheap
people,
joke.
yeah, the thing is, though, they've discovered, and I've seen several studies in states where you have the right, death with dignity or whatever, to end your own life. People tend to live longer,
yes,
and better. Kind of like my chronic suicidality. I stick around. I live longer and better because I know I have that option.
Yeah.
And they live longer and better knowing it's a matter of control. It was like this.
That's the key. That's what it's all about. Like like the sign to watch out for. Someone's suddenly happy.
Yeah.
It is all about control.
They did a study on pain and I think morphine, and there was a push for a while not to give patients the ability to dose themselves if they were in the hospital in pain.
Yeah.
Give them a button. And what they found was, they were worried they would overdose, and what they found was they actually used less because they didn't have to wait for somebody or try to get somebody's attention when they got into a great deal of pain. They tended to sort of stick it out longer between doses than they would have, because normally they'd have to begin asking for it, early to get it later because people are busy. But if they had control of it, they tended to use less and live with the pain a little longer before they dose themselves.
Yes.
So again, it's all about control.
Yeah, and I think that is what resilience is all about. It is all about control.
Yeah.
And, it's about making clean, conscious choices about how you live your life, and not blaming everybody else and such like. So
Yep.
So we've certainly, as I say, created comedy gold here to get today. Talk to me now. Come on, you were telling me, because I just need to be respectful of your time. We're not going to have time to talk about cruises this time, but if people want to find you and get hold of you, how would they do that? And tell me about this new book you're writing.
Let's see. Well, I'm writing a book with two women. It's an anthology, 42 stories by men for men. My co-author discovered that there was no book at Barnes and Noble on men's mental health, and men tend to take advice from men.
Yeah.
Men, it's most successful when it's men mentoring men. So,
I think that's a really important thing, because often the solutions propagated by women work for women but not for men. All this talking about your feeling stuff doesn't work for men. It's not our solution.
And that's what she did. Some studies, some surveys, unscientific surveys. But she talked to women and said, "What do you think men's problems are?" And the women listed problems, and she asked men what their problems were. And there were some similar items on each list, but different order. Yeah. Then she asked women what they thought that men would like to have in the way of help, and then asked men what they wanted in the way of help. And those two lists, they were completely different.
Absolutely.
So what we did was we gathered the stories of 40 men, alcoholism, bankruptcy, drug addiction, divorce. And in the first 500 words upstream, it's life's good. 500 words in the midstream, life goes bad. 500 words downstream, here's how I'm coping. And so we're hoping that men or women who have a man in their life will pick it up, read it, and there's all sorts of clinical advice and resources wrapped around the stories. But it's powerful in that these men were willing to share their darkest moments, which men don't tend to do.
Yeah.
And so that's our way of hoping to, because 8 out of 10 people who die in the U.S. are men age 45, 54. So it's epidemic. And we're hoping to stem the tide. And in Australia, they have something called a shed project, which shed, I guess, in Australia is like a garage.
Yeah.
They found if you put two guys at Starbucks staring into each other's eyes, they're not going to share much of anything. But if you put them under the hood of the car where they can't see each other, they'll talk about just about anything.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's not even looking. It's just there has to be there has to be a project. There has to be a task involved.
Right. Yes, that'd be doing something else.
Yeah.
That's just how men are. And so, anyway, we're trying to stem that tide. I'm going to write a book.
Good.
Called Start the Conversation on Suicide, because that's what most of my clients want me to do.
Well, I'll tell you what, Frank. Let's please come back when the book's nearer completion. Tell us all about it, and let's sort of dip in and out of it a little bit, and let's give the UK population a bit of a heads up on that, and hopefully we can spread the message in the UK as well.
Yes, and we can talk about my appearance on a music video that was extremely popular in England.
Yes, I think all three people you wanted saw that.
Oh, nice shot.
Bosh.
You can reach
everybody you meet fancies themselves as a comedian, don't they? It's a terrible.
They do, and that's fine. And speaking of which, you can reach me at thementalhealthcomedian.com. Thementalhealthcomedian.com.
That's it. And you're all over social media as well, and you've got some really great videos as well on YouTube. I've seen.
And Russell, I must brag a bit. I've just booked my 5th TEDx talk.
That is amazing. Congrats.
It's a little lighter fare. It's called Mental Health and the Orgasm. Treat your depression single-handedly.
Boom, ching, tra-ta-ta.
I know.
Frank, it's been a joy.
Yes, it has.
And I'm hopefully, and I really do mean this, it's until the next time rather than goodbye. So thank you so much for joining us today, and let's talk again when that book's ready.
Yes, I will be in touch as soon as the book gets published.
Superb. Thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Russell.
Bye now.
Bye.
Hang on, Frank, don't go.
Yes, I know. That's how this works.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks so much. I mean, you don't need me to tell you you're a natural, so thank you for that. It's great.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think you'll find my co-authors, Sally and Sarah, equally as conversational and, good. It's just going to be good, solid, listenable talk.
Excellent. Well, I'll get Paula to do that, and I really do mean that. And we'll hang on to this one, and we'll link them two together. In fact, we might. I mean, sometimes we had a burnout month last month that was actually very popular, so we might have a suicide month. That would be very interesting.
Oh, yeah, it would be interesting to record some for that.
Yeah, and then we might, we bring a lot of resources together in one place, and obviously being a guy, it's actually quite nice to do something on men's mental health for a change, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and again, it's epidemic over here. I'm sure it's epidemic there.
Frank, you're a star. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm definitely going to leave that person knocking on the door as part of the
Yeah, I would. It's, it's live theater.
Yay! That's what we're on about. Take care. Thanks ever so much.
Yeah.
Have a good night. Bye.
Thanks for listening today. You can go to our site qedod.com/podcasts and subscribe to hear other titles in our series. Or you can contact us at info@qedod.com to hear and find out more about tough love, leadership, accountability, resilience and burnout. You can go to our site qedod.com/burnout2019 to hear and get access to a load of resources to help you manage and fight burnout. And you can go to qedod.com/free ebook to hear more about the fundamentals of resilience. Until the next episode, keep on thriving.